Hello, you guys. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, you guys. I just wanted to come and talk to you guys for a little bit. I went to my doctor's appointment. This daggone kidney stone still have not passed, so I'm scheduled to have another look at it on Thursday. I think the 23rd, whatever day the 23rd is. I think that's Thursday next week. And then if nothing happens, then Friday they are gonna do this procedure next week. So that's where things stand for right now, because they're still not passed through yet. So I went to my appointment. I did some work before I left for my appointment. And then I came home and I started to do some more work. And so you guys know I'm always listening to something, when I'm working. Because a lot of my work I do in the quiet, unless I'm having an actual virtual meeting or something. And so, or I'm out, I'm out in the field. But most of the time, I'm home and I'm working at home. And unless I'm having a virtual meeting, I'm in the house. And in order for me to have some background noise, I'm normally listening to some type of something, whether I'm watching a documentary or movie, uh or some type of content, because it's better than me kind of like talking on the phone, because talking on the phone is like a distraction for me, right? And so these last few days I have been reviewing some content in relation to African Bambaataa, right? And African Bambaataa was the founder of the Zulu Nation. Back in the 1970s, this group was founded. He was originally a gang member, and then um he it's attributed that the reason that he changed his name from his born name, or now it's some speculation on whether or not that's even the name he was born with, but his birth name, he changed his name from his birth name to African Bambaataa after seeing the movie Zulu, right? So we know the Zulu people come out of South Africa, and so I guess he was inspired by this movie, and the inspiration of this movie helped him to leave this gang that he was a member of, and he creates the Zulu Nation. And out of the Zulu Nation, this became a movement, right? It became a movement in the 1970s in the Bronx, right? And it spread lots of other places, but the Bronx was the birthplace, right? And so there are lots of artists that came out of the Zulu Nation, like Queen Latifah, Coolio, Naughty by Nature, Q-Tip, Ice T, Ice Cube, Rakim, even Fat Joe, De La Soul, Curtis Blow, A Tribe Called Quest, KRS-One. All of these people and many more were inspired and came from this Zulu Nation movement, right? And so, probably you guys like me, you all listen to a lot of content throughout the day. You see things as you're looking on the different social media platforms, whether it's TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, True Social, whatever X, whatever other social media sites out there that you guys, Twitch and all of these other places. So a lot of times we are consuming the same news, just in a different format or in a different platform. And so there's been a lot of conversation these last couple of weeks about African Bambaataa because he passed away. I believe it was last week. And so there was a strong hip hop legacy that African Bambaataa left. But there was also some controversy behind African Bambaataa because a Rolling Stones article was ran on him. I can't remember if it was in 2015 or 16. But there was a Rolling Stones article that was ran on African Bambaataa, and it might have been before. I don't know. It might have been before that. I have to go back and try to see if I can find the Rolling Stones article, because the other thing I had difficulty finding was Starr's interview with B Singer, right? That has been like removed. I think Star, when I clicked the link to try to get the Star's interview, so you all, if you know the Star Report, right? Um, and the Star Report, he was originally a disc jockey out of New York. He was with Star and Buck Wild. Buck Wild is his brother, and they used to be on the morning show on Hot 97. And so he's a very well known disc jockey that comes out of New York. And he had a interview with B Singer, and B Singer is one of the accusers of African Bombata, right? Along with Hassan Campbell, and there is another French artist by the name of Solo who also made an accusation. And then a guy from the Zulu Nation, Poppy, he came forward. But then there are also some other anonymous people who came forward. One individual who alleged that he was a victim at the age of 12 years old, filed a civil suit against African Bombata. African Bombata never appeared in court, and as a result, that individual was issued a default judgment. And so it wasn't a criminal charge, but there was a civil case filed against him. And because he did not show, the individual was awarded this money. Now, I don't think he ever got paid, but the courts ordered it to be paid. And so, like I said, African Bombata passed away last week sometime. And so this has left the hip hop community having conversations, rehashing conversations, rehabilitating conversations, and having new conversations about the molestation of young boys and young girls within the African American community, and how hip hop and our culture has somewhat kind of like influenced this and kind of like fostered some of this by making these artists, right, more important to the culture. And so you overlook what they do, right? And I posted several things on my community wall to share with you guys. But there was one press conference that I was watching that was being held in New York, in the Bronx, and Hassan Campbell was there, and members from the Zulu Nation and other members were there. Some of the individuals who denounced the Zulu Nation as a result of these accusations. And this conference took place in 2016. And I titled this live Before Me Too for this reason, right? This is why I like to go back. I fall into rabbit holes and I dig deep down into things, right? Because sometimes what we think is an original thought or where we think something started is not actually where it started, right? Sometimes somebody else came up with something or an idea and we just haven't heard it yet. And in this press conference regarding African Bombata, talking about the molestation that African Bombata did of boys, because yesterday when I did my live about Joseph Duggar, and I talked about grandpa, right, in this conservative Christian, fundamentalist Christian home, how grandpa was being insulated by his relatives so that he could remain free. But the burden that placed on the children in order to keep themselves safe. Hey, Tessie, how you doing, boo? I'm talking about African Bombata. I am it's something I recognized and I picked up and I posted it on my community wall in case you want to go watch the press conference for yourself. But it's something I picked up in the press conference and I wanted to come talk to everybody about it, right? So, but yesterday I talked about Joseph Duggar from the Duggar families, there's 19 kids and counting. And I talked about how the girls were given the scolding and given all of these instructions, and they had this family system built where the girls were instructed to stay away from Grandpa Duggar because Grandpa Duggar had allegedly molested his own daughter. And so they were attempting, you said you don't know much about this case. I only know that he likes little boys. Okay, yeah. So I want to point out something from the press conference that I think is good that I watched. This press conference was from 2016, but I'm just giving a foundation for why I'm saying this, because yesterday in my live, I talked about how we are often, because we place accountability and responsibility on girls. And yesterday I showed through the example of the Duggars, right? These white girls that are raised in this Christian fundamentalist movement who possess none of these traits that are often attributed to Black girls, how they are still have the same pressure, accountability, and responsibility to protect themselves from predators that these girls that we look at and see in our own community, and we call them fast and all of these other things, and influenced by all of the wrong things, and we talk about them coming from these broken households, or or these money hungry households, right? And we see a difference in the Duggar household, right? Absolutely. Yes, they are. It's disgusting. But I'm reading Amy Duggar, who is Jim Bob Duggar, the daddy's niece, right? His only niece, his sister's child, right? She wrote this book, Holy Disruptors. And in the book, she talks about how her grandfather was molesting her mom. And how within the Duggar family system that was not Christian fundamentalist at the time, because the Christian fundamentalism in the Duggar household did not start until Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar. That started with their family. But Jim Bob was not raised in a Christian fundamentalist home, right? But we see the dynamics in this Duggar household of this two-parent household, Christian fundamentalists. They homeschool their children. They don't allow their children to watch anything that is non-Christian, anything that is not traditional family values, and all of these things. But we see the same pressures placed on the girls in the Duggar household that we see being placed on these Black girls, right? Our Black girls, right? Same pressures. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether the girls come from a two-parent household raised with what would be deemed proper morals, right? Or whether or not they come from the lowest of the lowest households, right? The responsibility that society places on girls is different than what it places on boys. And my question became, does this leave boys vulnerable? Because I am not just an advocate for girls. And I want that to be very clear for all of the people who try to make it seem like all of the people who speak up for women victims are hate men, and that they are me tours, and they are lovers and they hate men, and they don't think men come from their wombs, and all of this other garbage and crap that they spew, right? I am an advocate for children, whether the child is a boy or a girl. And so my question that I posed yesterday, because the girls in the Duggar household were given so much instruction to stay away from grandpa, because the attempt was for them to insulate grandpa because he's the predator, right? But we got to protect the predator. Because whether you are in a Black household where you have women who are protecting Black men doing it, or you are in a white household where you have white people and white women protecting white men doing it, you're doing the same thing. You're insulating a predator, right? You're insulating a predator. And you are isolating these children from having the experience of being a child, because they have to be worried about whether they are going to be preyed upon, right? But in the Duggar family system, the girls were instructed to stay away from grandpa, right? That was the instructions they were given. They couldn't do regular things with their grandpa like other little girls do with their grandpa. And listen, I'm a pop girl, right? It is no way that this would have worked with me. I am a pop girl. I went everywhere with my pop. I rode in the front seat with my pop. If my pop was preaching somewhere, I was sitting on the steps if they did not have a seat for me in the pulpit or in the choir loft, right? And so I can only imagine how these girls felt in this family system having to be told to stay away from their pop, right? And so this is what I talked about yesterday. And I was like, in that and in that teaching and putting all of that accountability and responsibility on these girls to stay away from grandpa because of what grandpa had done, because of grandpa's transgressions and his proclivities, right? How did this family system leave those boys vulnerable? How did it leave these boys vulnerable? And in a society where we allow boys to not be accountable, because when we place all of this accountability and responsibility onto girls, while society is doing that, it is creating all of these justifications and excuses for boys and why they do what they do. And why girls should know better to not do this because they know that boys do this. And this is just the nature of boys, and this is just the nature of men. And so girls need to be more careful and more cautious, and they need to be the more responsible and accountable being, right? This is what society teaches. And it doesn't matter whether the girls come from the hood or from the suburbs. It doesn't matter whether they come from a non-religious home or an ultra conservative Christian home or Islamic home, right? This is a burden that are placed on all girls across the world. This is not just in America. This is not just in the Middle East. Across the world, this burden is placed on girls, right? And so my question was, how are we leaving boys vulnerable? Because you're right. If I have to consider the fact that the child that comes out of my womb might be a boy, and I just so happen to have a boy child, so I don't have to consider it. It's actual for me, right? If I have to consider the child that comes out of my womb might be a boy, if I have to consider the fact that the child that comes out of one of my daughters or one of my son's loins might be a boy, that I might be responsible for having to try to teach and try to train and try to tell them the right things to do in the world, then I have to consider their vulnerability and how society makes them vulnerable too. Right? You said I went to a Bible study and the lady said that women shouldn't dress in a way um that tempts men so that they aren't raped. I never went exactly. And that's what I mean, Just V. This is something that transcends geographical location. This is something that transcends what type of household you're brought up into. This is something and burden that is placed on girls around the world to keep themselves safe from these predators. And then when something happens, this is why a lot of girls believe that it is their fault. It starts with them thinking it's their fault. And this is what sometimes does not send them to tell anyone. Because the very people in their household who is raising them is telling them that whatever happened to them was their fault. Right? So this is the challenge that girls face because of the level of accountability and responsibility that's being thrust upon them, right? But then my question then becomes, how are we leaving our boys who become victims vulnerable? And what does that look like? Right? And I think you said she was an old lady in a Pentecostal. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. But denomination doesn't matter. Religion doesn't matter. As much as people talk about what they teach in the Middle East and how they treat their women in the Middle East, it is a psychological warfare here in the United States that these girls are being brought up under and being taught the same thing. The women in the Middle East are taught if something happens to you, it's your fault. Women in the United States are taught under a Christian umbrella. If something happens to you, it's your fault. And it doesn't matter if you're black or white. It doesn't matter if you are raised in a two-parent household or not. It doesn't matter whether you dress modest or provocative. The same level of accountability and responsibility is always placed on girls. And so when you teach boys that boys are just being boys, and you teach girls that they have to do things in order to try to keep themselves from becoming victims of boys, what happens when the boy is the victim? That's my question. And is anyone considering that when they are having this conversation, that people who want to protect girl children hate boys? I would venture to say that the people who are not teaching their boys the same level of responsibility, the same level of accountability, that they are the ones who hate boy children. Because then we see instances like this with Africa Bambaataa. Okay? And it is a reason why I titled this live Before Me Too. Because from my own common knowledge, and I posted the other day, I posted a case with Keith Raniere. Okay? And Keith Raniere, for those who don't know, was the leader of what was called the sex cult. Before something else was called the sex cult, Keith Raniere, his NXIVM group was labeled a sex cult. Keith Raniere was represented by Mark Agnifilo, who we know was P. Diddy's lead attorney. Right? In this case, he had lots of attorneys, but Mark Agnifilo started with him, and he is his leader. He was the lead attorney in the case on the record. And so it was Mark and Teeny Garagos, right? You say, if you think women, girls are at fault, I doubt you take your son being molested by an adult woman as serious. Exactly, right? And we don't realize how we are actually creating some of this deviancy that we are seeing when we are requiring girls to be so accountable and responsible, and not requiring that same level of accountability and responsibility from boys. We create excuses and justifications, and to me, that is not loving men. But that's just my opinion. Everybody is entitled to their opinion, but that's my opinion. I think you hate men when you don't teach men how to properly conduct themselves, how to be responsible, how to practice sexual responsibility, right, in society. I would dare to say you hate men, right? That it is not the people who want to teach both boys and girls a level of accountability and responsibility within their body, so that they know enough to report when something wrong is happening to them. That it is not their fault. That it is not their fault. That it is a responsibility of every adult. And I don't care whether you are a parent or not. It is the responsibility of every adult to keep children safe. There is no adult that should be exploiting children. And if the adult is exploiting the children, then the adult is the responsible party. Right? And so, but oftentimes that is not what girls are taught. And it does not matter the background of the girl. It does not matter where she was born. It does not matter where she came from. This is not what the girl child is taught. And the boy child is flooded with justification and excuses for their behaviors. And girls are taught to try to circumvent, to keep themselves safe in the midst of those justifications and excuses. And so when the boy becomes a victim, and he doesn't have to become the victim of a woman, because the woman, for a boy to be taken advantage of by a woman, is praised by men in society. It's looked at the other way by most moms, and it is praised by men in society. But what happens when the predator and the person that preys upon your son is another man? What happens then? And in this case of Africa Bambaataa, that is exactly what we see. So the report coming out of this and the allegations made, and Africa Bambaataa did deny these allegations prior to his death, but it is overwhelming evidence from so many people around, members of the Zulu Nation, and so many people, that they witnessed this, that they witnessed it. Africa Bambaataa is accused of molesting boys as young as 12 years old. These boys have come and highlighted the grooming process that how he started out. And they give this account of what happened to them. Lord Jamar did an interview that I thought was very interesting. I think it was with Vlad. I know a lot of people don't like to watch Vlad, but I watch everything because you have to watch everything when you're trying to understand something. You don't just watch what you like or who you like. You want to watch all of it so you can try to sift through and decipher the information, right? So Lord Jamar had done an interview with Vlad. I think that Vlad interview might have been 7 years ago. So this interview didn't happen just because of the death of African Bambaataa. I went back. I wanted to go back because I wanted to know what was being said prior to the week of his death, right? So as I'm looking, I watched the Lord Jamar interview. I encourage all of you like to look at that. But I hop upon this press conference that I posted that was being held in the Bronx. And Hassan Campbell, who is one of the accusers of African Bambaataa, he is one of the speakers at the press conference. There are several other speakers there at the press conference, and it's just like they call it a press conference. Some people might not look at it as being that formal, right? It wasn't all of that formal. It would have probably looked like a gathering of the Hebrew Israelites outside of somewhere, right? That's probably what it looked like to most people, right? But they were having this, what they called a press conference, where Poppy, who was a close friend and also someone who witnessed the things that African Bambaataa had done, you had Hassan Campbell, and you had several other individuals there, and you had some members of the Zulu Nation present at this press conference. And in this press conference, there was a gem in the press conference that I did not anticipate when I decided to look at this press conference. So there's one particular speaker who begins to talk about the organization of the Zulu Nation. And he starts to talk about how the original intent and its original purpose of the Zulu Nation. And then he mentions the fact that at some point, this organization that was meant for good turned into a criminal enterprise. And I said, well, I'll be damned. I'll be damned. And he started to ask questions about what could be done legally to move forward to explore this option of African Bambaataa using the Zulu Nation as a criminal enterprise. And when I heard this man say this, I immediately sparked my attention. I was really listening in, y'all. I'm really listening in. Because we are always told on these Me Too streets who started Me Too and what the purpose of Me Too was and who it was intended to target and go after and who were the subjects of the Me Too and who Me Too hates. But I'll be goddamn, these men in this press conference in 2016 talking about African Bambaataa started what the legal base would be for the Me Too movement. They asked the questions. They asked the legal questions of what can be done when an organization starts off as something good, but then turns into a criminal enterprise. All men, all Black men in attendance. And this was the question. And the victims were men that were once boys. No girls. Hassan Campbell is quick to say, African Bambaataa has no girl victims. He only likes boys, little boys. And we get this in 2016 amongst a group of Black men who convene in the Bronx to discuss a child predator who is a hip hop mogul. Well, let me not call him a mogul, but a very prominent figure in hip hop. right? All men, all black men. And they asked the question of, is this criminal? What can be done? What can we do? Because they are out there trying to discuss solutions for the problem that they are looking at right in front of their eyes. This becomes the question. So I wonder what people think about that. Because I just so happened to stumble across it. I didn't know that I was gonna find that in that press conference while I was listening. I'm listening to it for other things, for other reasons, to get more information about the history of what this man has alleged to have been done. But right there in the Bronx, there is conversation amongst black men of what can the justice system do? What can we petition for the justice system to do? When an organization that was once meant for something good then does something criminal and turns this into something criminal. And I said, well, I be damned. Well, I be damned. And I don't even know if this, I know that the date on the YouTube video is from 2016. But I do not know if the actual press conference happened in 2016 or if it happened before 2016. But I know that question is raised amongst the attendees. They want to know what can legally be done to make this a criminal enterprise. They asked the question, a group of black men. A group of black men who are ready to go out and do something about their black girls too. They discussed black girls. But the topic of the conversation, and while they all convened, was to discuss the molestation of black boys. So I'm curious. I'm very curious, and I want to know what people think about that. I posted the video on my community wall. It is there for everyone to go look at and see and dissect for themselves. But I thought that was a very interesting jewel that I found inside of that press conference in the streets of New York being discussed of how to deal with the problem of children being molested. And the subject of molestation was not girls, but it was little black boys, little Hispanic boys, because that, according to the allegations, was African Bombada's preference. Not girls, but boys. And so I'm interested. I want to know what people think. What do you think now, knowing that there convened a group of black men whose order of the day was the concern of molestation of black boys within their community, and they wanted to know what could criminally be done when an organization that was meant for good, that birthed many of the hip-hop artists that we see today, they wanted to know what could be done in order to have this organization evaluated to see if this was a criminal enterprise. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. I take all questions, suggestions, concerns, all of that inside of my comments. Y'all have a great, blessed day, and I will talk to you guys another day.